The hidden truth about my mom that changed everything. I was 13 years old, and I thought my biggest problem was a boss in a video game I just couldn't beat. I was so wrong. My dad was out of town on one of his long business trips, leaving me and my mom alone in our quiet, suburban house. It was during one of these trips, while I was on a forbidden mission to find the hidden junk food, that I stumbled upon a secret. It was a small, crinkly, purple packet, hidden in the back of my mom's nightstand. The words printed on it in bold, white letters were condom seed. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew the word condom from the dirty jokes kids whispered at school, and I knew it was something bad. What I did in that moment of panicked confusion, and what I discovered in the days that followed, made me absolutely certain of one thing. My mom was having an affair. But the real secret she was hiding was a truth so heartbreaking, I never could have seen it coming. Let me start by saying, I don't have a neat and tidy story where all the loose ends get perfectly tied up at the end. This isn't a Hollywood movie. This is the story of how a single, crinkly little packet almost tore my entire world apart, and how the truth I thought I was uncovering was so much more complicated and heartbreaking than I ever could have imagined. The story really begins, or at least the part of it that I can remember, when I was 13. We were living in a state that wasn't home. My parents always referred to it as back home, a place 1,000 miles away, a place we left when I was too young to form any real memories of it. It was a mythical land, populated by relatives I saw once a year, and a history I only knew in fragments. My dad, he was a civil engineer, and his specialty was a very niche kind of bridge construction. It meant that for a few weeks, 2 or 3 times a year, he had to go back home to consult on old projects or survey new ones. These trips were a normal part of our family's rhythm. He'd pack his big suitcase. My mom would kiss him goodbye at the door with a look that was always a little too sad, and then it would just be me and her in our quiet, suburban house. At 13, I was at that awkward age where I was too old for a babysitter, but too young to be left completely to my own devices. I was a master of finding ways to be bored. I'd spend my days cycling around the neighborhood until my legs ached, or I'd retreat into the pixelated worlds on my PlayStation. But my mom, she seemed to need a different kind of escape. During my dad's trips, she'd sometimes get a call, or she'd just announce that she had some work to do. She'd put on a nice blouse, a little bit of makeup, and be gone for a few hours. It never seemed strange to me. She was a part-time bookkeeper for a few local businesses, so work was a perfectly normal excuse. She'd come back, often looking a little tired, a little distant, and we'd have a quiet dinner together. The routine was so ingrained, so utterly mundane, that I never thought to question it. Our life was a comfortable, beige-colored painting. Nothing too bright, nothing too dark, just steady. The particular trip my dad was on this time felt different though. Maybe it was because I was a little older, a little more aware of the undercurrents in the adult world. Or maybe it was just the oppressive humidity of that August, which made everything feel heavy and strange. He'd been gone for 5 days, and was scheduled to be gone for another 10. The house felt cavernous without his booming laughter or the sound of his evening news shows echoing down the hall. On the 6th day, a Tuesday, my mom got one of her work calls. I remember it clearly because I was trying to beat a particularly frustrating boss in a video game. And the shrill ring of the landline made me jump. She answered it in her usual soft-spoken way, her back turned to me in the kitchen. I couldn't hear the words on the other end, but I watched her posture change. She straightened up, her hand went to her hair, and a small, tight smile played on her lips. "Yes, of course," she said into the phone. "I can be there in an hour." After she hung up, she came into the living room and told me she had to run out for a bit, that Mrs. Henderson from next door would check in on me in a little while. I just grunted at okay, my eyes glued to the screen, my mind already back in my digital battle. I heard her go to her bedroom, the sound of her closet door sliding open, the soft rustle of clothes. Then, the front door clicked shut, and the house fell back into a heavy silence, broken only by the frantic tapping of my thumbs on the controller. I had no idea that the beige painting of my life was about to get a violent, shocking splash of purple. An hour bled into 2. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet but forgetful woman in her 70s, never did check in on me. The video game controller started to feel slick and foreign in my hands. The boss I was fighting seemed less like a digital monster and more like a metaphor for the restless, coiled-up feeling in my gut. Boredom, that familiar teenage foe, came back with a vengeance. I tossed the controller onto the couch and decided to go on a mission. Not a heroic, video game mission, but a far more mundane and slightly forbidden one. I was going to find the hidden junk food stash. My mom was a health nut, so the good stuff, the sugary cereals, the bags of chips, the cookies, was always hidden. It was a game we played. She'd hide it, and I'd find it. It was our silent little dance. My usual spots, the high shelf in the pantry or the back of the flour container, were empty. Feeling a surge of adventurous spirit, the kind that only comes from knowing you're home alone and unsupervised, I decided to VE. It smelled like my dad's cologne and my mom's lavender lotion. It was a space that felt intrinsically adult, and stepping into it felt like crossing a boundary. I told myself I was just looking for cookies, but a deeper, more curious part of me was just looking. I started with her nightstand. The top drawer was boring. Lotions, a paperback novel, a handkerchief. But the second one down, that was where the magic usually happened. I slid it open. Inside, nestled amongst some old batteries and a bundle of expired coupons, was a small, unfamiliar packet. It was about the size of a ketchup sachet from a fast food restaurant, but its color was a deep, vibrant purple. The material was a crinkly, metallic foil. My eyes scanned the words printed on it in bold, white letters, condom seed. My brain screeched to a halt. Condom. I knew that word. It was a staple of the dirty jokes whispered in the locker room after gym class. It was a word that was always accompanied by snickers and elbow nudges, a word that meant something adult, something sexual, something bad. But seed? That part didn't fit. The jokes were never about seeds. Was it something you planted? Like a weird kind of flower? The 13-year-old logic center in my brain, a place of pure, unadulterated misinformation, tried to piece it together. Maybe it was a gag gift? Some kind of weird joke item my dad had left behind? But why would it be in my mom's private drawer? A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This felt different from finding a hidden bag of chips. This felt like stumbling upon a secret I wasn't supposed to know. My heart started thumping a little faster. I picked it up. It was light, almost weightless. I turned it over and over in my fingers. On the back, in tiny print, was a price, $4.99. There were some other words, lubricated, extra sensitive, but they meant nothing to me. The only thing that registered was condom and the price. My mind, in its infinite, childish wisdom, made a decision. This was something bad, something dirty. It didn't belong in our house, in my mom's drawer. The thought of her having anything to do with a word from the boys' locker room jokes was deeply unsettling. I had to get rid of it. But first, a flicker of practicality. My parents were always lecturing me about not being wasteful. For 99 wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't nothing either. I made a mental note of the price, just in case she asked. I wouldn't want her to think I'd thrown away something expensive. Satisfied with my due diligence, I marched to the kitchen, pulled open the trash can, and buried the purple packet deep beneath a coffee filter and a banana peel. I felt a strange sense of relief, like I had just cleansed the house of some unseen evil. I had protected the sanctity of our home, or so I thought. I went back to my video game, the incident already fading from my mind, replaced by the immediate gratification of finally defeating that boss. I had no idea that by throwing that little packet away, I hadn't cleansed anything. I had just lit the fuse on a bomb. The next morning, the house felt normal again. The sun streamed through the kitchen windows, making the dust motes dance in the air. The smell of brewing coffee filled the small space, a comforting, familiar aroma. My mom was humming to herself as she scrambled some eggs, her back to me. The events of the previous day, the purple packet, the strange sense of unease, it all felt like a weird dream. I was a teenager, and my capacity for forgetting things that didn't directly involve me was practically a superpower. I sat down at the table, pouring a mountain of sugar into my cereal, my mind already on what I was going to do that day. Maybe I'd call my friend, Kevin, and see if he wanted to go to the arcade. The world was simple again. But as the morning wore on, a subtle shift occurred in my mom's demeanor. The humming stopped. She became quiet, her movements a little more frantic. She wasn't angry, not exactly. It was a different kind of energy. It was the energy of a person who is late and has lost their car keys. She started by patting down her pockets, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she moved to her purse, rummaging through it with increasing urgency, pulling out her wallet, a pack of tissues, a tube of lip balm, and placing them on the counter one by one. She muttered something under her breath, too low for me to hear. I watched her, my spoon halfway to my mouth, a flicker of that yesterday's unease returning. I knew that look. It was the look of someone searching for something important. She left the kitchen, and I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall to her bedroom. A few minutes later, she came back, her expression now etched with a clear, undisguised panic. Her eyes were wide, and she kept running a hand through her hair, messing it up. She was still wearing her robe, a clear sign that her plans for the day were unraveling. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, her gaze sweeping the room, as if the missing item might just be sitting on the countertop. Then, her eyes landed on me. The look in them was a mixture of desperation and hope. It was a look that made my stomach drop. She walked over to the table, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "I can't seem to find something. Have you seen a small packet? It's about this big." She held up her thumb and forefinger, indicating the size of a ketchup sachet. My blood ran cold. "It's purple," she continued, her eyes searching mine. "A purple foil packet. Have you seen it anywhere?" The world seemed to slow down. The purple packet. The condom seed. It was sitting in a landfill somewhere, buried under my family's garbage. And my mom was looking for it. The casual, joking tone from the locker room jokes evaporated from my mind, replaced by a sudden, sharp understanding. This wasn't a joke. This was something she needed. Something she was desperately searching for. And I had thrown it away. My first instinct, my only instinct, was self-preservation. "No," I said. The word came out of my mouth before I even had a chance to think about it. It was a lie. A flat, undeniable lie. I looked her straight in the eye as I said it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I haven't seen it." A wave of something hot and shameful washed over me. I had lied to my mom. But what was the alternative? Yes, I saw it. I thought it was something bad because of a word I heard in a dirty joke, so I threw it in the trash. The thought of saying that out loud was mortifying. Her face fell, a flicker of pure disappointment in her eyes before she masked it with a tight, strained smile. "Oh, okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No worries. It must be around here somewhere." She turned away from me, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She stood there for a moment, staring into space, clearly trying to think of where else it could be. Then, she seemed to make a decision. She turned back to me, her expression now one of forced calm. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" she asked. "Can you go into the hall and get some change out of the little drawer in the credenza? I need to run to the store for something, and I need some quarters." It was a normal request, a mundane, everyday chore. But as I walked out of the kitchen and down the hall, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. I pulled open the small, wooden drawer. It was filled with loose change, old keys, and stray buttons. "I need $4.99, she called out from the kitchen. The words hit me like a physical blow. $4.99. The exact price printed on the back of the little purple packet. The number I had memorized in a moment of childish practicality. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. My hand trembled as I scooped the coins out of the drawer. The pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving were clicking into place with horrifying speed. My dad was out of town. She had work. She had a secret purple packet. And now she needed the exact amount of money to buy a new one. The conclusion was obvious, and it was terrifying. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and quiet, agonizing observation. I walked around the house like a ghost, my senses on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the doorbell, every ring of the phone made me jump. The world I had thought I knew, the beige, steady world of my childhood, had shattered. In its place was a landscape of suspicion and betrayal. My mom, the woman who made my lunch and kissed my scraped knees, was now a stranger. A stranger with a secret life. The lie I had told her hung in the air between us, an invisible, toxic cloud. Every time she looked at me, I felt a surge of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a bitter, burning anger. How could she do this to my dad? To our family? I became a detective in my own home. I started piecing together a timeline of her work, trips, cross-referencing them with my dad's schedule. The pattern was undeniable. Her outings only ever happened when he was away. I started listening in on her phone calls, pressing my ear to her bedroom door when she thought I was absorbed in my video games. Her conversations, once mundane background noise, were now fraught with hidden meaning. One afternoon, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "No, I can't tomorrow," she was saying. "He'll be back. I know. I miss you too." My heart seized in my chest. "He'll be back. I miss you too." It was as clear as day. She was talking to him, the man from the purple packet. The confirmation was so stark, so brutal, that I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling over. I felt sick. I started watching her constantly. The way she'd smile at her phone when a text came in. The way she'd hum a tune I didn't recognize while she was making dinner. These small, intimate gestures, which I had once found endearing, now seemed like proof of her betrayal. Every action was suspect. A trip to the grocery store took on a sinister undertone. Was she really just buying milk, or was she meeting him in the parking lot? My mind became a factory of dark theories, churning out one horrible scenario after another. I felt a twisted sense of power in knowing her secret. I was the keeper of this terrible knowledge, the sole guardian of my family's fragile reality. But it was a crushing weight. I was just a kid. I didn't want to be the one to know. The anger I felt towards her was immense, but it was mixed with a profound sense of confusion and loss. The mom I thought I knew was gone, replaced by this character I was building in my head, a character based on purple packets and hushed phone calls. I started to pull away from her. My answers to her questions became short, clipped. I avoided her gaze. I spent more time in my room, with the door closed, creating a physical and emotional barrier between us. She must have noticed the change. She'd ask me if everything was okay, if I was having trouble at school. I'd just shrug and mumble a non-committal fine. How could I possibly explain what was wrong? How could I tell her that I knew? That I had uncovered her secret? The thought of the confrontation, of the screaming and the crying and the inevitable implosion of our family, was too much to bear. So I stayed silent. And in my silence, my resentment festered. Dad was due back in 2 days. The thought of his return, which once would have filled me with joy, now filled me with a cold dread. How could I act normal around him? How could I look him in the eye, knowing what I knew? I felt like I was complicit in her deception by not telling him. But telling him felt like an even bigger betrayal. It would mean destroying everything. I was trapped. I needed more proof. Something undeniable. Something that would force my hand, one way or another. The hushed phone calls and the frantic search for the packet weren't enough. They were circumstantial. I needed a smoking gun. I decided that before my dad came home, I would go looking for it. I would tear this house apart if I had to. I had to know for sure, even though a part of me was terrified of what I might find. The next day, with my dad's return looming, I was a bundle of frayed nerves. My mission was clear: find concrete proof. I waited until my mom left for one of her work appointments. The moment I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I went to work. This wasn't the casual snooping of a bored kid anymore. This was a methodical, almost desperate, search. I started in her bedroom, the epicenter of the mystery. I went through her closet, my hands shaking as I pushed past her blouses and dresses. I felt like a trespasser, a burglar in my own home. I found nothing but old shoeboxes and clothes I'd never seen her wear. I moved to her jewelry box, opening the small velvet compartments. Nothing but costume jewelry and a few sentimental pieces from my dad. My frustration mounted. Was I wrong? Was this all just a horrible misunderstanding in my overactive, teenage imagination? I decided to check her car. She always kept it spotless, but maybe she'd gotten sloppy. I grabbed the spare key from the hook by the door and headed out to the garage. The inside of the car smelled, as always, like her lavender air freshener. I checked the glove compartment. It contained the car manual and a stack of napkins. I checked the side door pockets. A stray pen, a pack of gum. Nothing. I was about to give up, my shoulders slumped in defeat, when I decided to check under the seats. I ran my hand under the driver's seat, my fingers brushing against dusty carpet and old receipts. Then, my fingers touched something crinkly. A piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from a restaurant. The name, The Oak Tree Cafe, was printed in a fancy, cursive font. I'd never heard of it. I scanned the rest of the receipt. The address was in a town about 30 minutes away, not a place she'd ever mentioned going for work. But it was the date that made my blood run cold. It was from last Tuesday. The same day, she had gotten the phone call and left for a few hours. The same day, I had found the purple packet. My eyes darted to the bottom of the receipt, to the itemized list of what she had ordered. There were 2 entries: a garden salad and a club sandwich, and a single iced tea. 2 meals, 1 drink. It was a classic, cliché sign of an affair. She had met him for lunch. The proof was right there in my hand, a flimsy piece of paper that felt as heavy as a tombstone. I stood there in the silent garage, clutching the receipt, my mind racing. This was it. The smoking gun. There was no more room for doubt. The hushed phone calls, the secret packet, the lie about the money, and now this. It all formed a perfect, ugly picture. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt a strange mix of vindication and profound sorrow. I was right, but being right felt awful. I thought about my dad, his kind face, his easy laugh. He didn't deserve this. He trusted her. He trusted us. And she was shattering that trust, one secret lunch at a time. I went back inside, the receipt clutched tightly in my fist. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call my dad right then and there, to tell him everything. But another part of me, a scared, childish part, was still holding back. What would happen after the call? He'd be furious. He'd probably catch the next flight home. There would be a fight. A horrible, earth-shattering fight. And then what? Divorce? Would we have to move? Would I have to choose between them? The consequences were too enormous to comprehend. I sat on my bed, staring at the receipt, the ink starting to smudge from the sweat on my palm. I had to do something, but I couldn't be the one to say the words out loud. Then, an idea formed. A cowardly, passive-aggressive, but brilliant idea. I would leave the receipt on the kitchen counter, right in the middle, where she couldn't miss it. I wouldn't say a thing. I would just let it sit there, a silent accusation. It would force her to know that I knew. It would force the confrontation without me having to start it. It was the perfect plan. I walked to the kitchen, my heart pounding, and placed the receipt squarely in the center of the granite countertop. Then I went back to my room and waited. I waited for the sound of her car in the driveway. I waited for the moment she would walk into the kitchen and see it. I waited for my world to come crashing down. An hour later, I heard the front door open. I heard her keys drop into the bowl. And then, I heard her footsteps, heading straight for the kitchen. This was it. The silence that followed was the most excruciating sound I had ever heard. It stretched on for an eternity, a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the air in the house. I was in my room, but I could picture the scene perfectly. My mom, standing in the kitchen, her eyes falling on the little white rectangle of paper on the counter. I imagined her picking it up, her brow furrowed in confusion at first, then her eyes widening as she recognized the restaurant, the date. I held my breath, waiting for the storm. I expected to hear her footsteps stomping down the hall, to hear my name being shouted in anger. I was braced for the explosion, but it never came. Instead, after a few long moments, I heard a soft sound. It wasn't a sound of anger. It was a sound of sadness. A quiet, shuddering sigh. Then, another sound. The scrape of a chair being pulled out from the kitchen table. She was sitting down. This was not the reaction I had anticipated. I was prepared for a fight, for a confrontation, for tears of rage and guilt. I was not prepared for this quiet, heavy sorrow. Curiosity, stronger than my fear, finally got the better of me. I crept out of my room and stood at the end of the hallway, peeking around the corner into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, the receipt held loosely in one hand, her head bowed. Her shoulders were shaking, but she wasn't making a sound. She was just crying. Silently. The sight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. All my anger, all my righteous indignation, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a confusing and unwelcome wave of pity. I had wanted to catch a monster, but all I saw was my mom, looking more broken than I had ever seen her. She must have sensed my presence, because she looked up. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her face streaked with tears. But when she saw me, her expression wasn't one of anger or guilt. It was one of profound, bone-deep weariness. And then, strangely, a flicker of relief. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at me, and I looked at her. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between us, but it felt different now. It felt less like a weapon and more like a shared burden. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse and quiet. "Can you come here, please?" she asked. "We need to talk." My legs felt like lead as I walked into the kitchen and sat down in the chair opposite her. I braced myself for the confession. I was ready to hear about the other man, about the affair. I was ready for the ugly truth. But the truth she gave me was so much uglier, and so much more heartbreaking, than anything I could have ever imagined. She didn't start with the receipt. She started with my dad's trips. "Your dad's work back home," she began, her eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "It's not just about bridges." She took a deep breath, as if the next words were physically painful to say. "When we lived there, before you were born, I had a support group. I still go. When your dad is here, I talk to them on the phone. But when he's gone, I go to the meetings. In person." I was confused. A support group for what? My mom was the strongest person I knew. What could she possibly need a support group for? As if reading my mind, she continued, her voice cracking. "It's a group for parents. For parents who have lost a child." The world tilted on its axis. Lost a child? What was she talking about? I was sitting right there. I was fine. My mind scrambled to make sense of her words. Then, she delivered the final, devastating blow. "You weren't the only one, honey," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You had a twin. A brother. His name was Alex." The air was sucked out of my lungs. A twin. A brother. A ghost I never knew I had. She told me the story in a rush, the words tumbling out of her as if they'd been locked up inside her for a decade. Alex was born with a severe, incurable genetic condition. He lived for 11 months. She and my dad were shattered. The grief was an all-consuming thing. They moved away from our home state to escape the constant reminders, the pitying looks from neighbors, the empty space in their lives where a son should have been. They made a conscious decision to never speak of him, to try and build a new, normal life for me, for the son they still had. The support group was the only place where she could talk about Alex, where she could grieve openly for the child she had lost, the child no one in our current life even knew existed. The receipt from the Oak Tree Cafe, the restaurant in the next town over, was from a coffee shop next to the community center where the group met. She'd met a friend from the group for lunch, another mother who understood her pain. The hushed phone calls were with her, or with the group therapist. "I miss you too," she had said. She was talking about missing the group, missing the freedom to speak her son's name. Every single piece of evidence I had gathered, every thread of suspicion I had so carefully woven into a narrative of betrayal, unraveled in an instant. My mom wasn't a cheater. She was a grieving mother, carrying a burden so heavy I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. I felt a wave of shame so profound it made me want to disappear. I had been spying on her, judging her, hating her, while she was just trying to survive. But what about the packet? I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. "The purple one." Her face crumpled, and she looked down at her hands, ready to explain the final, most painful piece of the puzzle. My mom took a deep, shaky breath, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. This was the last piece of the mystery, the one that had started it all. The purple packet. The condom seed. "After Alex," she began, her voice barely audible. "The doctors told us that another pregnancy would be incredibly dangerous. For me. They said it could be life-threatening." She paused, swallowing hard. "Your dad and I, we talked about it for a long time. We decided that our family was complete. That we had you, and we were so lucky. We didn't want to risk losing that. So, your dad had a procedure." She stumbled over the word, clearly uncomfortable discussing this with her 13-year-old son. "But he's forgetful. And I'm not as young as I used to be. The doctors gave me those. As a backup. Just in case." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. The frantic search. The lie. The exact amount of money. It all made a different kind of terrible sense now. She wasn't looking for the packet because she was planning to be unfaithful. She was looking for it because she was terrified. Terrified of an unplanned pregnancy, of the health risks, of the emotional trauma of going through it all again. The frantic search wasn't about hiding an affair. It was about the desperate, private fear of a woman trying to manage her own body and her own grief, away from the prying eyes of even her family. The fact that she needed $4.99, the exact price on the packet, was just a mundane, tragic coincidence. A cosmic joke that had led me down a path of suspicion and resentment. I had taken her private, painful reality and twisted it into the sordid plot of a cheap soap opera. A wave of guilt so powerful it almost knocked me out of my chair washed over me. I felt sick. I thought about the way I had looked at her, the way I had pulled away from her, the silent accusations I had thrown at her. All this time, I thought she was the one betraying the family. But it was me. I was the one who had violated her privacy, who had judged her without a shred of compassion, who had been so wrapped up in my own juvenile drama that I couldn't see the profound pain she was hiding. I started to cry. Not quiet, dignified tears, but big, heaving, ugly sobs. I cried for the brother I never knew, for the parents who had suffered in silence, and for the incredible, bone-deep stupidity of my own actions. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. Her touch was warm, her grip firm. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even disappointed. She just looked at me with an overwhelming sense of love and understanding. "Oh, honey," she said, her own tears flowing freely now. "It's okay. It's okay." We sat there for a long time, holding hands across the kitchen table, our shared tears washing away years of unspoken secrets. That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She went into the attic and brought down a small, dusty box. Inside was a photo album. She sat with me on the couch and showed me pictures of Alex. Pictures of him in the hospital, tiny and frail, wrapped in a blanket. Pictures of my mom and dad holding him, their faces a mixture of love and unbearable sorrow. She told me stories about him, about his smile, about the way he used to grip her finger. She gave me back a part of my history, a part of my family that I had never known existed. When my dad came home the next day, something was different. The house felt lighter. The secrets were gone. That evening, my mom sat him down, and with me by her side, she told him what had happened. She told him about the packet, about my suspicions, and about the conversation we'd had. He listened, his face a mask of emotions, and then he just pulled both of us into a hug, a huge, bone-crushing hug that felt like it could mend all the broken pieces of our family. We talked for hours that night. It was the first time I had ever seen my dad cry. It was the first time I felt like I was being led into the adult world, not as a spy, but as a participant. I'm older now. The beige painting of my childhood has been replaced by a complex, vibrant, and sometimes painful mosaic. I understand now that love isn't always neat and tidy. Sometimes it's wrapped in grief, and secrets are kept not out of malice, but out of a desperate desire to protect the people you love from pain. The condom seed incident, which I once thought was the beginning of a sordid affair, was actually the key that unlocked a decade of silent sorrow and, in a strange way, brought my family closer together. It taught me that the people we love are often carrying the heaviest burdens of all, and that the greatest act of love is not just to share in the joy, but to sit with someone in their sadness. So yeah, maybe my mom had an affair, but it wasn't with another person. It was with a memory, and for a long time, I was just a kid who was jealous of a ghost.